If the president can't get what he wants from Congress, he can go public. He can appeal to the people. He can make speeches. He can hold press conferences. He can do photo ops. He can sit down and do lots of interviews. He can try to get what he wants by getting the people behind him. A great example of this is George W. Bush, who, after being reelected in 2004, decided he was going to privatize Social Security. He said he had a mandate. He barely won the election, but he said that he had a mandate, and he had political capital, he said, and he was going to spend that political capital to take Social Security away from being a publicly run program and give it to private companies to run. And he launched a giant ad campaign. He went all over the country giving speeches. He did endless interviews about privatizing Social Security. And because Congress wasn't having any of this, they weren't interested in this. And the people hated it. And it's one of the things that really undermined his presidency. Now, this is a case where going public did not work. But many times going public has worked. Teddy Roosevelt very famously would talk about his bully pulpit, and he was going to go explain to the people what was going on, and he was very successful at it. FDR's fireside chats were essentially the president going public and taking his message directly to the people. Here's an average yearly approval for every president. You'll notice they tend to start high. Once you win the election, there tends to be, with the exception of Clinton, they tend to start high. And then you'll notice they tend to go down. With very few exceptions, presidents end up less popular than they started. Sometimes dramatically so if you look at people like JFK, LBJ, Nixon, Carter, Bush, and George W. Bush, maybe the most dramatic here. There are some exceptions, though. Clinton was an interesting case because his popularity rose fairly consistently. Reagan shot up and then fell back down because the economy improved rapidly in 1984 and then collapsed again, which explains that. Presidential approval gets a lot of attention from the media and from the politicians themselves. If the president is well received, then there's an idea that Congress should give him what he wants. If the president is down there in the 30s like Bush was at the end of his term, there's an idea that maybe Congress should specifically not give him what he wants. A different way to look at it, the average approval, who have been our most popular presidents. Now, one thing to understand is that this has tended to come down, particularly after the Vietnam War and Watergate. Just the general sense of approval of everything the government has declined, which explains a little bit why Ike and Kennedy are a little higher than the rest of the presidents. George H.W. Bush's, by the way, is a little skewed. He was only president for 4 years, and for about 18 months there, he had incredibly high approval ratings because of the Gulf War, when his approval rating shot above the 90s, and then they steadily declined after that. You'll also notice that Reagan, who's often painted as this like messianic figure who was beloved by everybody, really wasn't all that popular. In fact, was less popular than Bill Clinton. Policy support. The president attempts to gain public support through televised messages. These more and more mean less and less as people watch less and less kind of regular mainstream TV. And the president will attempt to motivate the public to do things like maybe contact Congress and pressure them. And of course, presidents are having to find new ways to do that. In the internet, Obama just recently did one of the Reddit, which is a website, Ask Anything interviews, which is kind of an interesting thing for a president to do. If you sign up for if they get a hold of your email list, they'll send you 10,000 emails a day too. Sometimes this backfires. Sometimes the president tries to go public and doesn't get any public support and ends up undermining him, like Bush in the case of Social Security. Because so much of the president's power, particularly on domestic issues, comes from his ability to mobilize the public, his relationship with the media is extremely important. The president and the media sometimes are adversaries, but they're also dependent upon each other. The president needs the media to get his message out. But at the same time, the media needs the president because they want access. If you get an interview with a high-ranking White House official or even the president himself, that's a big deal. Well, if you're making him mad all the time by reporting on things he doesn't want you to talk about, he's probably not going to give you that access. Many people in the White House deal with the media, but the press secretary is the primary contact person. If you watch the news at all, you'll know who the press secretary is because he's constantly answering questions and on the news, giving the White House's response to different situations. The media doesn't really focus much on policies, but they love to treat the president as a celebrity. So if he goes somewhere, if he meets with somebody, if he goes on vacation, if he goes out on a date with his wife, or his kids do something cute, these would be big stories. I remember when Obama first came into office and the family decided they were going to buy a dog. That was a huge story, much bigger story than, say, the Afghanistan war usually is. Post-Watergate, reporting on the president has become increasingly negative, which is one of the reasons why public approval ratings have tended to gone down, regardless of the president, as the media has come to understand its role in reporting on the president more as maybe pointing out scandal. So here's a little summary. Americans expect a lot from their presidents. They tend to blame or give credit to their presidents for virtually everything that happens, from the price of gas to the cost of college, things the president oftentimes has absolutely nothing to do with, and many times Congress really controls. The president is part of a massive apparatus, an enormous organization that literally employs millions of people. He's the head of it, so he takes the blame and gets the credit. But he's not just one man. It's a huge organization, our federal government is. The president's leadership of Congress is a central part of what he does, but it's also difficult and complicated. He simply can't make Congress do what he wants. And a lot of times, the American public misunderstands the actions of Congress and the actions of the president. The president has a lot of different roles, and I would argue that his most important roles are in foreign policy and being the commander of the military, even though very often when people talk about presidents, they talk about the economy. You think about Bill Clinton or even Bush in his second term or Obama now. They're so associated with what happened economically underneath them. But in reality, that's one of the things the president has the least direct control over.